In the spring of 2018, 6 Texas State University graduate students were entrusted with real technological equipment, and we set out to make a film project for our media studies class. Our film crew consisted of myself, Deborah, Bobby, Tyler, Catherine, and Sigourney, although she stayed behind the camera, and by stalking her online I could only find pictures of her cats. Sorry, Sigourney! To perform our inquiry into politics and the media, we asked people 2 main questions. So what is your favorite political film?
And also what you see is like the relationship between media and politics.
Oh my gosh.
The following is what resulted. Ask you, what is your favorite political film?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Oh, good question.
Film?
Hands down, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
I have an absolutely shameless love for Scandal.
Lord, I don't go to any movies or anything. I don't know any films of
Rocky IV. I like how it shows like the history, since like that was in the 1980s when it was made. Like that was when the Soviet Union was like bad and stuff.
Dr. Strangelove. A general has kind of taken over an army base and sent missiles to Russia, but it's all done in a very funny way.
Favorite political film?
You see a scene where they're in the big war room, where there's a map and you see the missiles going. The president, played by Peter Sellers, is talking and he says, "No, Dmitri," who's the Russian, like Putin, right? "No, Dmitri. No, Dmitri, I do like you. No, Dmitri, this isn't personal."
My favorite political film is Lincoln. I'm just a big fan of like history.
Favorite political team? Well, House of Cards for sure. That's where it's at. Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna be so bad at this because I feel like I don't watch enough political movies. And I love the Western.
Especially with Trump in the office. I can just sort of imagine that. "No, Putin, I love you."
My favorite political film is probably American Sniper.
My favorite political TV show would actually be Scandal.
I want to say The Manchurian Candidate. It's not a new movie, but it's, I think, fairly relevant, you know, to today's politics.
Plastic Paradise by Angela Sun, hands down.
My favorite political film is All the President's Men with Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman.
My favorite political film is Harry Potter.
Mine is How to Get Away with Murder TV show. It just talks about how race and gender and sexuality and all that stuff relate to law.
Man, that is a really good question.
So my favorite film right now for like political films, I would say The 13th on Netflix. I really like it. It's a really good documentary.
Paris is Burning, because I, as a gender non-conforming person and as someone who loves like the art of drag, as a person who loves like messing with what people think gender is about, that movie was not only important with like how race and identity plays into the art of drag, but how the art of drag allows you to be who you want to be.
You know, my favorite movie with a president, maybe. I'm gonna have to go with, you know, Air Force One.
I watch YouTube a lot, and so I pick a lot of like points of views and ideas from YouTube and not try to focus on one subject or one idea.
Why? Why do I like that? Because I'm the guy with $13,000 in the bank trying to run against people with $250,000, trying to reform a party, trying to stand up and do what's right. And Mr. Smith Goes to Washington is a guy who literally was never supposed to be a senator, winds up in a position of influence that can make great change, and he gets there by accident. And everyone thought he could be controlled, and he couldn't.
I actually like Scandal, the TV show. One of the first episodes that they had was actually about a gay man who had served in the military. He was very like, he was basically the basis for the Conservative Party. He was their figurehead, but he was closeted. It kind of struck me that even from the beginning they go into these really detailed storylines of people that I can relate to.
He did what was right, and then he continued fighting for what was right until he literally collapsed from exhaustion, doing what was right to the bitter end. Yeah.
Well, as you can see, it has a very intertwined relationship. Especially with the last administration.
I'd say like politics in film is really important because like I don't know, a lot of people don't read nowadays. Like we don't even have like newspapers anymore. Only old people have newspapers.
I try to stay away from movies, period. I have other things to do.
So a lot of people like keep up with news and like up to date with like current events through like social media and like through film.
I think maybe we get caught up with Hollywood. They're subject matter experts, and that's not the case. They're entertainers.
If you believe in something, then in the movie talks like about your side. Like, let's say that back in America, like you're like one of the people who hate Soviet Union, and you're probably gonna like that movie.
Yeah.
So I think in some ways it could be good, but it just depends on someone's taste.
I think a lot of people get their information on politics from places like the news or TV shows like that. So it's important to see representation of like all sides in media.
I think it's really important because like personally me, I'm not really big on politics and all of that. So I think it's a really good way to just get informed.
I mean, they interact everywhere in some good ways and some very toxic ways. I think we have seen, again, on the national stage, how simply doing the most shocking thing can be a good way to get lots of free press coverage.
Well, I would say that the good majority of Americans believe there was a second shooter on the grassy knoll because of a film, so I would say that film can greatly sway public influence.
But I guess the other thing I see is the question of how to cut through soundbite culture.
You know, it's a double-edged sword.
But the simple reality is, whenever we speak to a large audience, we have an ethical responsibility to speak truthfully. In fact, I gave this exact speech to the Bexar County Republican women on January 20th, and I got heckled for it.
Well, I've lived long enough to know that film often can make a commentary about politics.
Politics can be either a very important part of a film or just kind of a kind of in the background thing. I think every film in some way has some kind of like even like Disney films or like the Lorax.
Right.
The Lorax, they speak for the trees. Like it's about environmentalism.
I mean, I have so many. It's like obviously they're connected, but it also seems like they're like intertwined, and it's just like they feed off of each other.
Sure, yeah.
In like this really unhealthy, bad way.
I think it's a really good avenue for representation. I mean, not just of, minority groups who aren't typically recognized. I mean, just look at, Wonder Woman coming out, Black Panther, movies like this that are so big for a lot of people who don't usually see themselves on the screen.
I think that whatever's going on in the world in politics is usually on people's minds when they're making movies, when they're making a documentary. So what's going on in the world will always, I think, directly influence what's on film, even if the film isn't about politics. I think you see the issues of the day often going into film and movies.
I try constantly to look for, transgender specific movies because I want someone that I can relate to. I want a trans man character that I can look at that and say, hey, that's my experience too. But almost without fail, every single one of them, trans guy kills himself, trans guy gets killed by someone, trans guy ends up depressed. And then it took me to watch a German film, not even an American film, a German film, to finally find a trans guy who is happy at the end of the movie. I feel like I shouldn't have to look outside my own country just to get something that represents me somewhere. I'm not. My how I live is not necessarily a political statement, even though it is a topic of political debate. I am a person. I would like to see people like me, without that being a big deal. So.